And she said to me, "Can I look at you one last time?" And now she's standing one step in front of me. And I said, "Yes, of course you can." And she turned almost all the way around and she looked at me, and the color was back. I could see her blue eyes. I could see her brown hair. I could see her skin color. And she looked healthy. She was back to when she looked so healthy about 5, 6 years before. Even though she had cancer, she was healthy. She was glowing. And that's what Katie looked like right then. But she didn't look at me long at all. She quickly swung her attention back to the gate. So she finished, look, she turned around, and then she lifted up her hand and the gate opened. And everybody was standing behind that gate. There was my mom, my dad, my aunt, my nephew who had died by suicide 2 years before that. He was the most excited. He was leaning forward from his waist forward and with a big smile on his face. And I could feel that he was feeling my Auntie Kate's coming, because they were very close. My Auntie Kate's here. My Auntie Kate's coming.
My guest today is Annie Stewart, who had a shared death experience with her sister while she was going through an illness. But even more than that, she's had her own near death experience and signs and synchronicities. And today we're going to spend a lot of time learning about the wisdom that she has gathered from all of these experiences. So, Annie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Laurie, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this.
Oh, I'm so glad that you want to share this. I know it's a lot to make yourself vulnerable and put yourself out there. So I appreciate you doing that.
Okay.
Well, why don't you talk about your life before you had your near-death experience?
Okay, Katie was a year older than I am exactly. We were born in South Africa, grew up most of our years there. We were always pretty close. We had spent time doing different things in our lives, but somehow we had each other's backs all the time. And we came across the United States together, and we kind of got into a tighter knit where we both helped each other with our kids and going through the processes there. And then about 11 years ago now, she was diagnosed with breast cancer. And that put everything in a whole different light, as in I became a caregiver, but closer, how can I say, closer than a sister in a way, because I was caregiver and sister, but having to switch between those roles. So it was really interesting and challenging sometimes to be both and to separate them, and at times to bring them together. But we were very close, and it was, we went through everything. She was my partner in crime and my confidant and my best friend and all that. So there was, I mean, a lot of really good years.
Oh, how blessed you are to have that. I know not everybody gets to experience that in their life. So that sounds like a blessing. So while she's going through all of this and you're the caregiver, you have your own near death experience. So why don't you go ahead and tell that in whatever way you'd like to share it?
Okay, what happened with that was Katie she came to the end of her battle with cancer, and she was brought home to me on hospice. So I had her, and well, with her came her two cats and her dog, and I had two cats. So I ended up with a zoo and a sister on hospice in a relatively small little house and on my own, and sole caregiver with that. And we didn't have any family close by. Her sons are up north, a son and daughter up north, and my kids are mostly up north. So everything went fine for the first week. And then the cats got into a fight, and somehow I got involved in that, and I was scratched on my hand or bitten or something. I don't know. There was a lot of blood. And thinking I was smart, I washed it off. And then I realized I have some antibiotics in the house. So I took them, forgetting that I'm allergic to penicillin, and I didn't check. And within a minute, I went into anaphylaxis, and a friend of ours came down and said I had to get to the hospital immediately. Needless to say, I didn't know much about that time period, because I started losing my sight and my hearing, and I was throwing up, and I was going. I got to the hospital, and they got me in the room, and the nurse said, we're going to have to intubate you. So I said, no. She said, but it's bad. We're going to have to do that. And I said, let the medications work. Let's see if that works. So she said she'd try her best. And the next thing I remember, apart from all the machines making these crazy noises, was I was back in my living room where Katie's bed was. But I was about ceiling height, but there wasn't a ceiling. There wasn't a house. It was like a gray mistiness, kind of like the color that's behind you.
Oh,
And all I could see was Kate laying in the bed and her friend, or our friend Aranel, sitting on the couch, but she was sitting in a different place from where she normally sits. And as I'm looking down at Katie, the question comes from me, what would happen if I die now? And the answer came back from not an entity, but from the everything. And it just came back and it's okay. She'll be okay. It'll all be fine. And then Katie and her friend disappeared. And the next thing, all the animals are in front of me, all 4 cats and the dog. And they're all in a straight line looking up at me. And I thought, well, what would happen to them? Can they be kept together if I die now? And the same question, the same answer came back. Don't worry, it'll be fine. Yeah, everything will be okay. And that disappeared. And then the faces of my 3 adult children were all looking up at me. And before that question was formed inside me, I knew I wasn't ready to leave them yet. So the question wasn't fully formed and the answer never happened. And the next thing I remember is that the nurse was waking me up and she said, okay, you can go home, throw the medications away, because next time you're probably not going to make it if you take those medications again. So she left and I'm like, okay, I got dressed and I walked out and got out of the hospital. And I was very aware walking out. I didn't know where I was because I didn't know how I got into the hospital. So another nurse had showed me the exit sign and I went out. But I was careful not to touch anything, even then, because I felt that I might go through it. I had this weird feeling that I mustn't touch anything or brush up against a wall or a cart or a chair or anything. I got outside and there's that very broad area where the cars come in and drop people off at the ER entrance. And I remember seeing cars driving and seeing people walking and talking, but I couldn't hear them. There was silence. It was this weird silence. So I looked across and there was a narrow sidewalk up against a brick building. And I thought what I'd do, because at that moment I thought, well, I don't know whether I'm alive or dead. I didn't know with surety whether I was even alive. So I walked across the roads and I got to the sidewalk and I thought, I'm going to touch the wall. If my hand goes through it, then I know I'm dead. That was with this brain. And then I also thought, well, how am I going to feel if my hand does go through it? How am I going to feel about being dead? So anyway, I walked across and I touched that wall very gingerly at first, and then a little bit harder all the way down. I walked down the sidewalk and got to the end, and there was a signpost on metal pillars. It was probably the ER entrance signboard, and I was tired, and I thought I just want to lean up against that before somebody comes and picks me up. But I don't want to fall through it, because if I fall through it, people might laugh at me. Because if I'm dead, I'll fall through it. And then I realized, okay, if you fall through it, you're dead. Nobody's going to see you. So I stood up against the pillar or the post for a couple of minutes and pulled myself together and until I felt that I knew I was alive again, where I could hear sounds and I was hearing it with my ears, and I felt like my feet were solid on the ground. And then I had somebody pick me up and bring me home. So there were 2 aspects to that experience, and they were both relatively short, and no bright lights, no other beings, nothing like that.
Well, I've heard a lot of people who have had near-death experiences talk about bilocation, where they're going to other places, they're seeing other people doing different things. And sometimes when that happens, they're seeing something that they can tell somebody later, which is evidential information. Did you have any of that? Because you said you went back to your house. I know your sister's there. I don't know if anybody else is there, but
Yeah, our friend Aranelle, she was here. She was the one who was sitting on the couch in the place that she doesn't normally sit, because normally she would sit right at the end, which was closest to Katie's bed, and she was sitting in a different place. So a couple of days after that, I had spoken to her because she was here when I got home, but my focus was on taking care of Kate. I was very concerned that something would happen to me that I couldn't take care of her. So I fell back into that role. And about 2 days later, I asked Aranelle, I said, why were you sitting in a different place on the couch? And she was like, how did you know that? So there was that confirmation for me. And even then, I didn't tell her exactly what had happened at that point because all the focus was on Kate.
I love that. I love it when you can prove something evidentially that there's no way you could have known that. That's wonderful. That had to have helped you and cement that was real. But did the experience as you are having these encounters with the four animals looking at you and your children's faces and Katie, did it seem like a dream? Did it seem, how did it feel to you?
It, it literally felt as if I was looking at them like I'm looking at you. It was real. They were there. It wasn't just that they were a shimmer or they were partially there. It was as if I was somehow above looking down, at about ceiling height, looking down on them. It it was real. Yeah, it was absolutely real. And yet also I didn't question that. In that moment, there wasn't a surprise that I was hanging near the ceiling. It was just that this is. There was no surprise or no worriedness about it. I wasn't scared or afraid or anything like that. It was just what it was. It was in the moment real.
So when you were describing the voice that you were questioning, you were asking those questions. Why is everybody going to be okay if I leave? What's going to happen to the dogs? What's going to happen? Will they stay together? All of those things. And you said the voice answered back. When you at first were saying it, I was thinking, gosh, I wonder if it's her spirit guide. I wonder if it's her higher self. And then you called it something that I haven't heard people use. And you used the term the everything. What do you
Yes.
mean by that?
In that it didn't, number one, I wasn't surprised that there was a voice. And that comes up later again in the shared death experience. I wasn't surprised at the voice, but it didn't come from a singular. It didn't come from a singular entity or being or space even. It was almost like surround sound, but deeper. It was more than three-dimensional. It was everything answered. It was, it, I don't really know how to put into words, but it wasn't just like I'm hearing you or you hearing me. It was just whether it wasn't in my head only, I knew it was coming from outside me or the part of me that was there. It was just the everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, what kind of feeling did you have? I know when people have a near death experience, they feel sometimes that great love and oneness. Did you have anything like that in this?
No, there was no, not at all. There was no feeling of peace, or there wasn't a lack of peace, and there wasn't a darkness. As I said, it just was. It was comfortable. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't stressed. I wasn't under any pressure. It just felt kind of like hanging in a swimming pool. It just was. It was the feeling was just relaxed and okay. Everything's okay. There was no this is scary or anything. It was just everything's okay. Just this is just what I'm dealing with now, and it's okay. And each answer came back, don't worry, like with Katie, don't worry, she'll be okay, it'll all be okay. And with the animals, don't worry, they'll be okay, it'll all be okay. And then obviously with the kids, there wasn't an answer to that because my question stopped. So
Right. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we jump into your shared death experience and what happened with you and Kate?
okay, can I go to the one that came after that first?
Yes.
Because
What came after?
that was the
Oh, that's right. You got the signs and synchronicities before. I forgot about that.
shower experience where, and that was, I think that the near death was right before Christmas. If I think correctly, it was like the day before Christmas. So about a week later, and again, it was a very stressful time, and I was extremely tired. I was getting about 3, maybe 4 hours of sleep a night. I was Katie's sole caregiver day and night. There was occasionally when Aranel could, she would come in as much as she could, but I didn't want to give up the responsibility in that sense. It was too tense and too new. But Aranel came in one day about a week after the near death experience, and she took one look at me and said, "Girl, you need a break. Go and have a shower." Probably really needed one. Go and have a shower and go to sleep for a while, relax or whatever. I've got this. And she's an ICU nurse, and I knew that she could do better than I could taking care of Katie. So I was totally relaxed with that. I was totally okay. I let that all go. I went to the other end of the house, closed the door, and went to go and have a shower. So I'm standing in the shower, and Kate's at this point, Kate's in my living room, and she's asleep in the bed, and Aranel's sitting on the couch again in her normal place, um, just making sure Kate's got somebody with her in case she wakes up. And I get in the shower, and I'm doing my hair, and it felt like Kate came into me. It was like full body came, like I became Kate and myself. And all I heard inside my head was, "Ha ha, sis, look what I can do," in Kate's voice. Now, that wasn't an unusual thing for her to have said, in that being so close, we often joked with each other or did something weird and would say, "Ah, look what I can do." But I got one heck of a fright because I knew she was asleep in the living room. So I jumped out of the shower, and that stopped right there. I just jumped out, got ready, and said to Aranel, "I'm okay." Kind of because I didn't want to talk about it right then. There was too much going on. There was too much I had to do. So it was another one of the many things in my life I just put in a box and left it there for a while. And a couple of days later, Aranel came in again. "Off you go and have a shower." And this time it was almost like I could feel her moving in before she actually came in Katie, before she came into me. And I stood there for a minute and I thought, okay, let me see if this is her. And I reached up to touch my hair because her hair was a lot coarser than mine. And as I touched it and I realized that is Katie's hair, I realized I was experiencing the touch as being me and Kate in my body, but I was also outside of me, in front of me, looking in. So I could feel me touch my hair like I'm doing, but I could also see me doing it from an outside point of view. And then that stopped. I'm like, okay, I wonder how long this is going to go on. And I finished up a lot slower and a lot more relaxed than the last time. I took my time, had a bit of a break, and then came back in. But again, I did not talk to Aranel. It happened one more time, briefly outside when I was sitting outside at about 2 in the morning. But that was very brief and not much at all. And after that one, I did speak to Aranel, and she's a whole lot more spiritually connected than I've ever been. So she said to me, when I told her that, she said to me, "Look, you do know that you can tell Katie or ask Katie not to do that because you are overwhelmed and it's just too much." So the next time it happened, I felt Katie coming into me. And as she did, I said, "I'm sorry, I love you, but please don't do this now." And immediately that feeling went away, and she hasn't done it again. And I kind of wish she would, but she hasn't done it again.
Wow. All right. Those are incredible story. That's an incredible experience that you had. And I want to talk about a few different parts of it. I'm going to address the last part first because I think that this is really helpful for the people that are watching.
Okay.
You told her in your mind lovingly, "I love you, but I don't want you to do this again." And I think that this is an amazing reminder of the one universal law that governs us all here in this earthly incarnation, which is free will,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I've had conversations with people over, the long period of time that I've been on this spiritual journey. And one of the things that people don't understand is that no one, no entity, nothing can overcome your free will. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if you want to protect yourself and you feel like there's something in your house, you feel like there's, some type of a spirit, or,
Mm-hmm.
if you're working with spirit guides, I think you always can say, I only wants to work with somebody from the highest and greatest good, and you can disallow anybody else. So I want
Mm-hmm.
you to speak to this because obviously you've had a lot of time to think about this. And what are your thoughts on that part of that free will?
I think it is very real because not only that experience, I did have and I'll touch on it very briefly. Uh, Before all of this, no, I think it was before all of this. I was at the eye doctor, and I had my ex-husband we've been divorced about 10, 11, 12 years. And suddenly all these memories kept on pounding in my head. And I'm like, just stop. Why is this happening? And evidently I said something out loud. I said, stop it, leave me alone, because everybody in the waiting room looked at me and I'm like, okay, sorry, people, I'm not quite sure. And he did. That ended that experience. So it's not just with Kate, but it's also with him. And there's been some other minor things where I have learned that, yes, we are able to, even with that near death experience, when the question about my kids came up, I was able to say, no, I don't want that. And so it's shown me that we do have that. I almost want to, I'm not sure I want to use the word control, but yes, control.
Right.
Um, we have the ability to dictate what we will accept and what we won't accept.
Yeah. And I think that there's so much power in that. And when people understand that, they know now that nobody can encroach on that free will.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really amazing. The other part I want to talk about is the fact that you had this in the shower. And I'll tell you why I'm so fascinated and I couldn't wait to talk to you today. I too have had two very spiritually transformative experiences in the shower. And the reason I think the shower is a place that this happens is it's twofold. Number one, I think you're doing a very mundane activity that you could do on complete autopilot. Because I've also heard about people having these experiences when they're walking somewhere or when they're
Mhm.
driving, when they're doing something very repetitive.
Yep.
And I also wonder if the water itself has some
Mhm.
type of special properties, either
Mhm.
because it relaxes us, like you said about the hot shower. But my
Yes.
experience was a little bit different than yours, and I'll just share it really briefly, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this. So I had a love that I was connected to, and because the timing wasn't right, we ended our relationship and we hadn't spoken for 3 years. At the time, he was 46 and very healthy. And I was walking one day in the woods and I had this thought that he died. And I thought, that's a really weird thought. And I shoved it away. And about an hour later, I'm in the shower and I'm taking a shower. And I have this second thought that he died in a plane crash and his bandmates were going to call me and tell me. And I knew it wasn't my thought because if I was going to have a death scene for him, it would have been from lung cancer from smoking, not from flying, which I thought was very safe.
Uh-huh.
Fast forward 2 hours later, I found out that he had died of a massive heart attack. And my parents discovered it and were able to share the information with me. And I know it was his soul coming to me and sharing a message so that I would know, and maybe it softened the blow a little bit. He
Mhm.
wanted me to know that he was still around. And so it's interesting that this happened to you while Katie was still alive, but since she was in
Mhm.
kind of that death process,
Yes.
you're a little bit more loose and lucid maybe and not as attached by the cord for your body. So will you
Mhm.
you've had some time to think about this also. What are your thoughts about all of this?
As I said, now the experience I was telling you about with the ex-husband, I found out about 2.5, 3 months later that he'd actually died at that time. I didn't know.
What?
So,
Oh my gosh. So do you think he was sharing that so that you would know that you
yes,
were still connected? The same way that
yes,
happened to me.
yes. And that's what I'm saying. I absolutely, and there's been so many experiences with Kate after she has died that, and what happened with these, particularly these three, the near death, the shower incident, and the share death, all happened in a period of 5 weeks for me. Okay.
Wow.
So what had happened after first, second, I didn't pay them attention because I had to be with Kate. My
Sure.
total focus had to be on her. When the share death experience happened, it was like a doorway opened, and I realized
Mm.
all these other things that have been happening to me since about 18 years old. And I started writing them down, and there's pages and pages of it, of things that have happened that we tend to dismiss. And when we look at, there's no doubt in my mind that there's more and that they do come back. And I can tell you a few later on about the things that Kate has told me what to do afterwards, after she has died. And then they're there. It's real. It's
Well,
absolutely.
go ahead and share that now, where we're right here and having this synchronicity and signs conversation, because seriously, the number one most popular video on my channel is about the signs and synchronicities for passed away loved ones. I know people are very fascinated because they want to know that their loved ones are still alive. They still love
Mm,
them. They didn't disappear into nothingness. They exist and they still care about us. And I think
yes.
that this is so powerful when people have experienced a loss, to understand that this is true. And it's like that 4 minute mile. Once they hear you talking about it and they hear me talking about it, then it can become real for them because they
Yeah.
know the possibility exists.
Oh, it's what somebody said to me a long time ago, you can't always be the stairway, but you can be one step.
That's beautiful.
So, yeah, I've kind of hung on to that for 20, 25 years. I thought that was pretty cool.
That's great. Yeah, go ahead and share whatever
But
you want to share about your signs.
one of the things that comes from years ago was I was living up in Tennessee. As I said, I grew up, and my first 35 years were in South Africa, in southern South Africa. And I was living in Tennessee, and a friend of mine who was also in the States, she lived across the road from me in this little town in South Africa. And one night, and I'd had a couple of instances where I'd left my body, but just up to the ceiling and then bouncing back down. And this one day, one night, I was suddenly aware that I was flying. And I remember kind of giggling because it's kind of like Superman, my arms straight out. And I remember giggling a little bit, thinking, is that what I'm really doing? And I flew over the land and, hit the ocean at the bottom of Florida and went for a while. I zipped in a bit in Namibia, Southwest Africa, and over a friend's house there. And I ended up at this other friend of mine who now lived in the United States at her house. And I saw that she had a whitewashed wall with a round top and a swimming pool in her house. Her husband lived there still. And I'm like, well, when did they put that up? And the next thing I was back, but the trip back was a lot quicker. It was just like I was in bed after that. So I emailed her and I said to her, well, when did you have the wall put up and the pool put in? And there was a long space of time she didn't get back to me. And eventually she said, I don't know how you could have known that. It's just gone in. It's not on Google Earth. She said, I've spent hours looking where you could find that. There's no ways you could know that.
I love that she did your work for you so that you
Yes.
would have a greiter confirmation.
I was telling her what happened, and she's like, "Oh, oops." So, and
So did
then,
you astral travel? Is that what happened?
as far as I can tell, all I know is I just flew, and I could see the waves beneath me. I could see where the land came in. I could see flying over the houses, and I landed at the house right next to where I lived, and that was her house. So I don't understand the reason for that, other than to add another brick to the pile or another step to the ladder, or whichever it is. Around about that time, maybe a bit earlier than that, also friends from South Africa, um, they had moved out of South Africa and we'd largely lost contact. So it was maybe once a year we would write or phone and have a quick phone call. And I had a dream one night about Bill. And I knew that in this dream we were in London. And he had this long black coat on with a top hat and a nice walking stick. And he was turned away from me, and I knew it was him. And I just stood, and then he turned around, and he looked at me, and he said, "Hey, Annie, tell Pat I'm okay, please." And then the dream was over. So I knew that he had to go for some kind of surgery to the UK, but that he didn't really want to go at all. But that had been in the talks for 18 months before that. So I finally got hold of Pat, And I said to her, I don't understand where this is coming from. Is Bill around? I just got to tell you what happened, kind of, oh, this is funny. But I knew I had to share it with her. So I told her about the dream, and there was this long silence. She said, Annie, Bill passed away a couple of months ago.
You had no idea.
I had no idea. We hadn't had the contact to know that. And we had moved in the States, and I wasn't even sure she had my new address. So, but things like that had happened, I had put away. I had, because life was busy. There was a whole lot of stuff going on, and I just didn't pay it attention. After Katie died, there's a couple of them. The one was, I was having a full-on hissy fit, all fall down. It was a bad day, and I was stomping around the house, and I stomped up my corridor, and I'm yelling at her, how dare you do this to me? How dare you leave me alone? We were supposed to get all together. We had plans. We had things we wanted to do. And I'm halfway up my passageway, and I hear this voice slightly above me, but also not from but it was her. And I spun around, and I'm like, was this all a nightmare? Is she really standing right behind me? How could this be? And what she said was, no, Annie, don't you remember last time you went first? Now it's your time to stay longer. Now, Kate did not believe in reincarnation. She wouldn't talk about it. She didn't want to know about it. That was just too woo. She was not going to do it. And yet it couldn't have been my thought, because I knew she didn't believe in it. So
That's beautiful. I love, love, love that on so many levels, because there's no way then that you can push this away as a coincidence, because that's not even what you would have expected. Yeah.
And then there's a couple of things. The one morning, it was about 3 o'clock, was my magic hour in the morning, when some thought, whether I resolve it, I'm a computer tech as well. So if I hit up against a problem I can't solve, I pack it away. At 3 o'clock in the morning, my answer comes to me. So this one that's been for years. It's just been a thing. I've never even paid that attention, as in why or what does it mean or anything. So after Katie died, maybe 2 months or so, I woke up turning around. I didn't wake up and then turn. I was turning around when I woke up, because I knew Kate was standing on the other side of my bed. And I turned around, and there she is standing, but she wasn't. And I realized she wasn't on the floor, because she was slightly higher. She wasn't right up against the ceiling. And in that moment, I knew her feet were a good maybe 1.5 to 2 feet off the ground. And she was standing in khaki shorts and a shirt I didn't recognize, and a little ball cap. And she was looking down at me, and she said, "Hey, Annie." And then she was gone. And I must have gone back to sleep immediately, because there was no questioning it. There was no, where did you go or anything like that. I just woke up the next morning and thought, what the heck just happened? Because she was as solid as I am. It wasn't just a little vision. It wasn't a see-through. I could see the color. I could see the shirt she was wearing, and she had a smile on her face and the ball cap. And one other one. I again woke up the one morning, and I was already sitting up in bed. I don't do mornings too well. So my first thought was, why can't I just wake up first and then either turn over or sit up or something? I'm waking up, sitting up. And Kate's in my head again. And it's not like I'm hearing her with my ears when she does this. She's in my head. She's not like I'm hearing we talking. And she says, get up and go to the beach and go and see the dolphins. And I'm like, Katie, it's still half dark. We haven't seen dolphins at the beach for a good long time. And if we have, it's one and it's way out. I don't really feel like getting up now and go to the beach. So I lay down again. And she yelled at me, get up and go to the beach and see the dolphins. 20 minutes later, I'm on the beach, and I'm looking down. Oh, you got to listen. And I walked down from where I parked the car, and I went straight down to the water. And from that time, for an hour and 20 minutes, there was not a moment that I didn't see a dolphin, at least one dolphin, all the way. And I walked about half an hour this way, or 20 minutes, and then I come back again. That was where we used to walk. That was our we'd walk to what we call the end of the beach. And then at that end, I turned around again, and the dolphins were right swimming again, jumping out. Some of them were closer, some of them, sometimes one, sometimes three or four. And then I stopped because there was a dolphin interacting with a paddleboarder. So I stopped with my feet in the water, and it was about mid-tide coming in, so it wasn't noisy, but it wasn't the quietness sort of thing. And I was just standing watching this, and then I heard music. And I don't know that I knew the song. I don't remember ever hearing it, but somehow I knew the song. But there were two things that I heard. Now I'm standing in the water. What I realized after I heard it was there was a restaurant behind me, right off the beach. The beach is fairly wide, and there's a whole lot of chairs in between. And then there was the building off the sand area, and everything was still closed, but they had started their music. But I'm standing in the water looking at this dolphin, and all I hear is, "I miss you, girl. I will always love you." And I'm like, what the heck? Where's this coming from? Then I realized it's the restaurant, and I knew I had to get home and find out what song it was. So I did. And the song is by Journey, Worlds Apart. And
Oh my gosh. You're
there's
speaking my language, Annie. Like, this is what happens to me all day, every day. I have multiple synchronicities. I want everybody listening to this. You probably just thought to yourself, oh, that's a really cool story. But think about all the things that have to be lined up at the same time for you to be at that spot at that moment. You're
yes,
watching the dolphins. She's already woken you up to get you there.
yeah,
And then all of a sudden, this random, and I'm using the air quotes,
yes,
song starts playing. You don't even necessarily know the song, but it's not about the song, it's the lyrics. And then you feel compelled to look it up, and the title is Worlds Apart. Like, I
yes,
love how spirit will pull out all the plugs, all the stops to really
yes,
get your attention. It's almost like they're bashing us over the head, like, yo,
yes,
doing
yeah.
this.
And even put the paddleboarder in the way so I would stop there because I had stopped there for a good while. And also, Kate and I would often talk because we spoke about her dying quite openly. And we would talk about it as this being her journey. So the song being by Journey, Worlds
Oh my
Apart, it was just,
gosh. Of course it is. And
it
so
was,
for the people that are listening that aren't familiar with signs and synchronicities, like, look, spirit doesn't have a limitation on the other side. They're energy. And to them, everything is happening outside of time. There is no time for them. So for them to put an obstacle in our place, to manipulate an electronic, to influence somebody to play a certain song, it's nothing for them because they're so powerful and they're at such a higher frequency than we are.
then you're talking about manipulated electronics. I'm a sketch artist as well. And I have a little lamp tied up, and it kind of comes over where I'm drawing. And about maybe a month after she had passed away, I got back into drawing because I'd had to take a break. I wasn't able to quiet myself enough to concentrate in doing that. And I pull the light up, and it starts flickering. And I'm like, oh, my light's breaking. So immediately I get on and I go and order a new light exactly the same because I like that. And I sit back down again and I put the light on, and it doesn't flicker. It's flickered, but there was even the one day when and then I realized I was actually listening to somebody else's story, and they're talking about the flickering lights. I'm like, oh, let me try this. So next time it flickered, I said, all right, Katie, if that's you, stop. And it stopped. And every now and again, when it comes on, it flickers, and it's not, when I'm a little bit of a cynic. So I kind of look at it and say, it's electronics. If I put it on at exactly 8 o'clock and it flicks at 8:05, there's an electric issue there. But it was totally random. I can draw the whole evening in the last 2 minutes. I've never even taken the new one out the box because this is a year later, and it still flickers. And I've learned to tune into when it's flickering, because I find those are the days that I've had a little bit of a rough patch. I might be okay right in that moment, but I've had a little bit of a rough patch that day regarding her, and that's when it flickers. So
That's why it's so important to write these down, not only because no matter how big the sign is, over time, you're not going to remember it exactly how it happened. But also, I love that you started paying attention because they are tuned in to how we're feeling and what we're doing. That's not a limitation for them to understand.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so much. And again, I think only after the shared death experience did I allow, or I had the emotional and mental space to sit and really take it and take in not only those three experiences, but all the other things, as well as then some of these after she had passed, these experiences that had happened. I mean, she had another one where she yelled at me in an aeroplane, and I'm like, that just totally reduced me to tears. It was the
You're
first
like,
time.
why in a public place, doggone it?
Yeah, it's hard enough to hold myself together. And that was the first trip. It was about 2 months, 2.5 months after she had passed. I went up to Tennessee to meet my newborn grandson. But coming back was the first time I would come back home without Kate being here and without
Mhm.
having her pick me up at the airport. And it was rough. And I always used to take pictures out of the airplane windows as she would, and we'd share them. And, because we just loved the view from up there. And I was scheduled to come in at sunset. So I was really excited because I can take pictures for Katie. Oh, she's not here anymore. So that dragged me down. And then the aeroplane which was delayed like 2.5 hours or so. We finally came in at about 11. And I always look out the window. There's always something to see, even at midnight, pitch dark. There's thunderstorms, something. So I'm looking out the window, and then the pilot says, "All right, 20 minutes to landing. We're going to, sit, put up your seats and everything." And it hit me that I'm 20 minutes away from not being able to be with Kate anymore. That really hit me hard at that moment. And I thought, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to lean back, do some and just relax and try and get myself together. And I leaned back in the seat, and in my head, Kate's yelling, she says, "Sit forward. I've got something for you. You got to look out the window." So I'm answering her and I'm saying, "What? Are you going to be sitting on the wing, or are you going to send me an alien or a little UFO? What are you going to do this high up?" I mean, really. So I'm kind of chatting with her in a way. And I closed my eyes again and she said, "Sit forward. I have something for you." And again, I'm a little bit of I'm not a skeptic anymore, but I'm a little bit cynical, as in I feed the birds outside. So feather landing at my feet isn't a big thing for me. It might be a thing, but it's not clear enough for me. But this was something different where I sat forward and I looked out the window and it's pitch dark with a little light dim at the end of the wingtip. And I'm like, "Well, where are you? You're not sitting on the wing. There's no UFO. I don't see anything." And all of a sudden, St. Pete came into view. And I could see we came in low enough because the issue that for the delay was a downwind indicator or something. So we came in lower than normal, right over the beach where Katie and I always walk. And I could see the moonlight reflecting off the waves. And all the different colors of the town were like little gems. And she started talking in my head and she said, "Annie, this is for you to explore and enjoy without my issues holding you back." And I just lost it because I'd never looked at her as holding me back. And we'd moved down to the beach to be closer to the water because we grew up close to the beach in South Africa. So we wanted to be close to the water. But her issues became bigger once we were here. But I'd never thought of them as being issues. And here she's telling me, "This is my gift to you, to explore and enjoy without my issues." It was,
Oh, that's
yeah.
beautiful.
And people can say, "Well, that's just your thought." But no, that's not how I thought. So it wasn't my thought. And if it
Yeah.
was my thought, I would have dismissed it and kept my eyes closed and dealt with it, not sat forward again and looked. So
Right.
those
Yeah.
things.
Well, I love that you mentioned that you have a healthy dose of skepticism. I think we all should.
Mm.
And I once had the radio screen freeze with a Starship song, and my passed away loved one was the lead guitarist of the band Starship. And even though that happened, I still called XM Radio and asked them to reset my radio, and it didn't go away despite me turning my car on and off and running three errands until my friend came out, waved at the screen, and said, "Hi, Mark," and then after that, it was gone. So I do think that we should have some skepticism because everything is, I mean, you could make everything a sign, I suppose, but when the signs are really real,
Yeah.
you'll know when they're real. You'll feel it, like maybe
Yeah, you do.
here, and
Yeah.
maybe you'll get another confirmation so that you understand that this really is a message for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've learned to, as you said, with grief, there's a lot of things that go through your mind, and there's a lot of things you tend to, because a lot of times with grief comes guilt, whether it's deserved guilt or not. And there's things one tends to make up in your head, but when this happens, like the things that have happened with Katie, there isn't a doubt. I know it's not me, you
Yeah.
know. So
Yeah. Well, I have two questions I want to ask you about the signs and synchronicities that you shared. And then after that, I would like to hear about the shared death experience. So
okay.
the first one was, you mentioned that Katie came to you in the dream. And in the
Hmm.
dream, she felt very real. And I want to just bring that back up because I know for a lot of people, after they've had a loss of a loved one, the loved
Hmm.
one will come to them in a dream. And I think the difference between a dream and a visitation is how they look. And you described her as being super vibrant
Hmm.
and not like you would have expected her to look. And I think that this is a way that you can discern between, is this a dream or is this a real visitation from my passed away loved one?
That was a visitation. That was not a dream. I have had dreams, and there's a big difference.
Yes.
This was Katie actually standing next to the other side of my bed. So,
Yeah.
so, and as you said, solid as can be, as say as human as could be. The clothes, it was 3D. There was depth. It wasn't a. So there's a big difference between the dreams I've had of her and the actual visitation. That one I described was she was there. She visited.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other one that I wanted to ask you a question about or bring up a point about is that you had your friend that you called, you'd had a dream about her husband, and then you
Mhm.
discovered that he was gone. I'm wondering if you had just had a dream about her husband and you knew he was gone, do you think you would have called her to share that with her?
Probably not. Probably not, because even now I find when people are in their grief, when they're losing things, I don't tell them my stories. I don't tell them if I've seen something or had a dream, because they have to deal with their grief in their own way. And by telling them something about me, I feel, depending on the circumstances and the closeness, it could, in a way, in a way, could tell them I'm trying to refocus. I'm
Take
trying to
away from
take
them,
some.
take away.
Yes. And so, no, if I had
No, I
known he
get
had passed
that.
away, I probably wouldn't have. I
I
might
get
have
that. I guess
mentioned it.
I'm asking a different question. I'm
Yeah.
asking, when you've had a dream about somebody else, your
Mhm.
dream, but your dream was about that other person.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a power in us sharing dreams that we have about somebody who's already died because you have no
Yeah.
idea if there's a hidden message that's meant for the person
Mhm.
that's still left behind.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I was going to say, that I think I would have shared it in a letter, later on, not 3 months after he had died, because that's still you're in the thick of grief. And because we communicated by letter mostly, I wouldn't have made the phone call to tell her that.
Mm,
It would have been in a general letter saying, hey, this, that, and oh, by the way, I had this dream about him, and just put it in as almost a sharing, but not the main theme. Give it, but
right,
not give it as it was given, basically, the way I called her. So I think there's a
right.
difference.
Yes. I had a friend one time who had a dream that was very vivid of a mutual friend of ours who had passed away. The wife was still living. And she actually called me and said, I had this dream. This is what it was. Should I tell her? And I said, I feel like it's a message. And she
Hmm.
did call our friend, and our friend, of course, burst into tears because it was very soon after the death. But
Hmm.
it was part of her healing process. She was so grateful to have received a
Yes.
message.
Okay.
So I think that there's that part too. And the reason I wanted to bring it up is I do have several people in my life who regularly dream of random people in their lives who have died. And they're
Yeah.
always, kind of, it's a question of, do I tell or do I not tell? And my recommendation is always that if the spirit came to you and
Then
you're
you
the messenger, I think you
probably
deliver
have an
the message.
obligation. And
Yeah.
again, that, being countries apart, she was still in Northern Africa and I was here, and we'd had So I think maybe I'm just making excuses, for a situation that didn't happen. But that brings me to one quickly about my neighbor that you're
Sure.
right about sharing, is that my neighbor passed away maybe 8 months ago now. And he was a really good neighbor. He was a really nice gentleman. But we were there wasn't a lot of contact. And then I knew his family had come and he was passing away. And then the daughter told me that he had died, but they were going to leave the body until the next day so some family could come say goodbye. And late that night, family came, and then I heard another vehicle coming, and it was the coroner or whoever came to pick his body up. So, bit of a funny thing. By now it's 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning, and I switch all my lights off and then make sure everything's unplugged. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, I want to say goodbye to Cyril because he's been a really nice neighbor. He's been a very nice gentleman. And I just want to pay my respects. And there was nobody else there. So I'm lurking inside my house and peeking through the blinds. And I hope like heck they don't think I'm spying on them or whatever. Eventually, after a while, they take the stretcher in. And then I see them pulling him out. And it's not something I would think even then, because this was a good 8, 9 months after Katie had died and a lot of stuff had happened. As they pulled him out in his carport, he was always very proud of the Christmas lights he would put up. And they were still on, but they weren't the blinking kind. They were just the multicolor on. And I could see them through my closed blinds. But so I was looking through the blind and I saw them bringing him out. And I said, come on, Cyril, if you're still around, just bad word with the lights. Okay. And I don't know where it came from. And I'm thinking, well, why did I say that? And as they wheeled him out, those Christmas lights went off and on and off again. And I'm like, so now my mouth is falling open. I'm standing in this dark house and I'm thinking, I don't even know how that happened. Okay. So the next day I went to a friend in the park and I said, look, this happened. Should I tell them? The family that's there. And she said, oh, you have to tell them. So I went to tell them. They were very pleased to hear about that. They also, oh, Dad said goodbye. So yes, there's that, as you were saying, that's important to tell. And they were very glad that I had shared that with him because they felt that, okay, he's still there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared that with us. All right, so you did have a shared death experience. So would you like to share that one?
All right, that was just over a year ago, end of January. Katie died, and she was unresponsive for about 2 days before. I could hold her head and ask her a question, and sometimes I would get the slight nod or shake of her head. Like I'd ask her, are you in pain? And she'd say, no, are you okay? And she'd say yes. But those basic questions, she really wasn't eating, drinking, anything. It was basically non-responsive. And Aranel again had stayed the last night she was alive. Aranel had stayed the whole night because this is all new to me, okay? And Aranel knew how close Katie and I were, so she hung around with me. And about 7 o'clock in the morning, after taking care of Katie's needs, Aranel said that she had to go. She had to go home, go feed her cats, and get some sleep. So she had to do shift the next day or something. So she bent over Kate and she kissed Kate's forehead and she said, I'll see you on the other side. And I walked out and I walked to the kitchen and let Aranel out, locked the door, and I came back in. It was still dark. And Kate's laying on her back with her head straight up, and there's a tear running down the side of her eye, and the other tears pooled in the other eye. And I was like, that's weird because she's been unresponsive. How could that? There's something that's still aware. So I thought, okay, I need to come and sit on the couch and just pull myself towards myself and just get ready because I knew we didn't understand why she hadn't passed away yet. So I knew this was on my watch. Aranel was going to be asleep. There's nobody else. I'm going to sit and just get myself together. And as I sat down, I knew there was this utter knowing that no, I needed to be right at Kate. So I pushed myself forward, and as I got off the couch, you know how your head and everything's facing down. In front of me, up against the floor, was the numbers 842, like a big alarm clock, bright red letters. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what that means. I can't deal with that now. I know that I need to be with Kate. So I brushed that away and I pulled up a little office chair and put the railing of a bed down and put my head on the pillow next to her head. So I was bent over her bed. And then all of a sudden, there was this African lullaby that I hadn't thought about in years. My dad would sing it to us when we got hurt or when we needed soothing as kids. And this lullaby was pouring out of my mouth. It's too loud, the African lullaby. And it was almost like I could see it was like a scroll. And I was this far away from Katie's ear, and I could almost picture this music just going. And I'm like, okay. And then the next thing I realized is that my house had disappeared again. It was in the same grain, like the NDE, again, like behind you. And I couldn't see, from me, I was my shoulders up. I was aware of that. Not that I looked down, but I was aware that I was visible from, and Katie as well. Even the top part of her bed was not there. It was gone. The animals were all quiet. Since the cats had that fight, they've had to be locked up in different areas. So there was always some meowing going on. That sound disappeared. The dog snoring disappeared. And I remember thinking, okay, that's okay. Again, I wasn't worried. I wasn't afraid. And the next thing, I was standing on this road. We didn't get there. We didn't go there. We didn't move there. We were just there. And Katie was to my right. And she was not hunched, but she was in pain. I could still, at that point, I could feel her feelings. So we've got this road. It wasn't a wide road. And on the sides of the road, there were flowers and plants. And I remember thinking a little surprised that there weren't these bright colors that everybody talks about. They were kind of muted pastel colors. But still, as a photographer, I'm like, that would make an awesome picture. And immediately all the color disappeared. I could see the flower. I could see the plants and flowers. And I knew they had color, but I knew I couldn't see the color anymore. So the message that I got there was, this is not for you. This is about Kate. So I concentrated on Kate and I said, no, sis, you can stand up straight now. You don't have pain anymore. And we didn't look at each other all the way to the end of this road. But in my peripheral vision, I could see her bouncing on her legs. She was like, oh, okay, this feels good. And she was back to not feeling the pain. So she stood a little bit upright. And then I explained to her that we have to walk along this road, that there's a gate at the end of the road, and that's where we need to go to. Right when I'm telling her this, with my other half of my brain, my human brain, I'm thinking, how did I know that? How did I know that? And how did I know to say that? But okay, that's life. And I said, we just need to walk. And she had the last 6, 8 months of her life. She'd say, give me a minute, whether it was an emotional or physical movement she had to make to adjust to the pain, or she said, give me a minute. And it was always take all the time you need. There's no rush. So the same thing happened walking down this road. And we were communicating, but I'm really not sure what about. All I know, it was gentle, casual, light communication between us. It was telepathic. I wasn't hearing her through my ears, and I wasn't sharing through my mouth. And we got about halfway down this road, and she stopped solid. Oh my God.
I know, the cat just jumps up.
I'm sorry, I can't stop her. She'll do it. She's a cat. And we got about halfway down this road, and Katie stopped solid. And she said, Annie, I would much rather just stay here with you. And I said to her, I would much rather you stay here with me too, but you can't. We can't go backwards. We can't stop here or go to the sides. You have to go forward. But then I had the opportunity of telling her again how important she was in my life, and how much she had meant to me, and how much she'd helped me, and how much she'd guided me, and how important she was. And it just felt like a package given to her. That part wasn't a conversation. It was something that I was sharing, almost putting into her. And she said, okay, give me a minute, give me a minute. And after a little while, she said, okay. And we went on again. Now, from this point, about the halfway point, I could see the gate. And I could see, and it took a while, because every couple of, I don't want to say steps, but every little bit, she would say, give me a minute, and we'd stop, and I'd just take all the time. So I got to a point where not only could I see the gate, but I could see that there were figures behind the gate. And at one point I said to her, Katie, look, there's mom, there's dad. You can see, because the gate had it had square pillars, and then it was kind of came up with a slight round, and it's like a typical gate with bars came down, and I could see the people through the gate. At that point, I knew who was there. They weren't all a clump of people. They were individuals. They had individual clothing on and color, but I couldn't see the color. The color of everything had gone and was still gone at this point. So I said to Katie, look, you can see there's mom, there's dad through the gate. And again, she stopped solid. And I knew that she didn't want to be taken. She wanted to go. She was very independent in her life. She was very capable. And she didn't want to go before she was ready. She needed, so I said to her, don't worry, nobody's going to come and get you. You have to go there. They're not going to come and get you and drag you across. And again, I could feel her shoulders going down. And she said, okay. And we walked on a little bit further. We got to about, I would say, 6 or 8 feet from the gate. And we stopped. And at this point, I could see clearly who was behind the gate. But we stopped, and I said to Katie that what you need to do to open the gate is you just need to lift your hand like you do in a classroom. And the gate will open for you. And at that time, again, I thought, how do I know that? I mean, how would anybody know? How would I know that? So there were 2 parts of me at work even then. And she said, okay. And I said, but before you do that, I have to take a step back. I'm right next to her, but I have to take 1 step back. And I said, I'm going to take a step back, but I'm not going anywhere. I will still be with you all the way to the end. I'm going to stick with you all the way through. And she said, okay. And then we stood there for a little while looking at this. And she said to me, can I look at you one last time? And now she's standing 1 step in front of me. And I said, yes, of course you can. And she turned almost all the way around and she looked at me, and the color was back. I could see her blue eyes. I could see her brown hair. I could see her skin color. And she looked healthy. She was back to when she looked so healthy about 5, 6 years before. Even though she had cancer, she was healthy. She was glowing. And that's what Katie looked like right then. But she didn't look at me long at all. She quickly swung her attention back to the gate. And also in that moment, I felt, I wish she had looked at me longer, but because she was looking at everybody behind the gate, that made me happy. I didn't feel bad that she didn't look at me. I was just glad that she was now focused on that. So she finished, she turned around, and then she lifted up her hand, and the gate opened. And the gate slid open, but it didn't go past the gate post like gates do. It disappeared into that gate post on the left. And everybody was standing behind that gate. There was my mom, my dad, my aunt, my nephew who had died by suicide 2 years before that. He was the most excited. He was leaning forward from his waist forward and with a big smile on his face. And I could feel that he was feeling, my Auntie Kate's coming, because they were very close. My Auntie Kate's here. My Auntie Kate's coming. And he was hugely excited. And I could see people, it was like those paintings, the minimalist painting where you take a fine brush and you just do 1 line and that's a body, and a dot and it's a head. So I couldn't see the eyes, the nose, and the mouth, except on Matthew, I could see his big smile. But I knew that they were all looking at Kate, that not one of them was looking at me. And I didn't, even in that moment, I didn't feel excluded or left out or sad that I wasn't. It was all about Kate, and it was utterly the way it was supposed to be. So we stood there for a little while, and I could see people that I knew, people from childhood, people, Kate's friends, my friends' family. There was also a lot of people that I knew, but I didn't know where from. Like you go to somewhere and you say, I know that person, I just don't know where from. That's a lot of people were like that. And so we stood there for a while, and then Katie says, can I wave at you one last time? And she had this crooked little arm wave. And I said, yes. And she didn't turn around again. And at this point, all the color, even in her, had gone again. It was only when she had turned around to look at me that color was there. And she waved at me. And as her left hand went down from the wave, her right hand went out. And she, I don't know, she skipped, jumped, jauntily jogged off to the people behind the gate. And as she reached out to them, they all had their hands down by their sides all this time. And only when she reached out her hand did they then reach out their hands. And it was just fabulous. The whole greeting was just like, I don't know, I like to say it was a surprise party with people that she never thought she'd see again. And she was totally in this, and she never turned around again. And then I saw I thought it was a hair at first, between the gate posts. And I wondered why there was big hair laying between the gate posts. But on that crack, which it was, the gate posts and everybody there broke away and drifted away, kind of like the slow moving of continents type. That was the thought I had then. And it drifted away into a, a mist, a fog. And as it went away, I heard this voice again from the everything, was just said, that was a job well done. And I wasn't surprised at the voice, and it wasn't a male, it wasn't female, I wasn't surprised it was there, and it was just like it's there. It was just a thing. And then I found myself to the left of where the gate had been, and there was a mist fog thingy coming towards me, just this loose pattern of fog, and it engulfed me and it held me up. I remember being in an upright position thinking that I know what a silkworm feels like inside a cocoon, because it was just such a peaceful feeling, not that overwhelming feeling of peace at all, but I knew that I was being put back together. I knew that I wasn't being made different. I was just being whole. I was being made whole again. And I don't know how long I was in there for. And then I had the pop feeling. It was like if like the sports people sometimes on the field, they used to run through this big piece of paper or something. There was just that pop sensation. And I was back in my living room with my head next to Kate on the pillow still. And suddenly everything was back. I could hear the cats groaning and the dog snoring. And I lifted my eyes up and I looked at the clock that's on the wall. And it ticked over to 8:42. And I looked down, I lifted my head a little bit and I looked down at Katie and her last breath went to my face. And it was 8:42 and Aronel had left at 7 that morning. This had been an hour and 42 minutes. I was still bent over her bed. It was light outside, end of January, down in Florida. It was still dark at 7 in the morning. It was 8:42 in bright sunlight. I don't know what happened. So there was a situation, there was
Wow.
right at that moment, I'm coming out of this reality that was more real than real. And then I'm looking at my sister who's just died. And so that was another experience I put away for 2 or 3 days. I just couldn't deal with, I had to deal with all the, things going relating to Kate passings.
Right. Well, I'm so sorry for your loss because even when we have these experiences, we physically miss the person
Yes.
when they leave. And I'm so grateful that you shared this story. So I'm curious, how did your having a shared death experience with her help you process her actual physical death?
Oh, I feel it was easier than what I see. And it was definitely easier than, well, when my mom passed away and even my dad, there was a lot going on. And it was between my son having leukemia and Kate having breast cancer. And so there was a lot going on. Kate's passing was tougher than theirs in a lot of ways, but easier. So I didn't grieve as I saw other people grieving about their family members. And that made me feel guilty. So along with the lightening of the grief came a battle that I've won, I feel. I don't feel the guilt of that anymore. But there was that time it's like, why, how am I able to get on with my life? How am I able to do this when she was my other half? And now I'm okay, mostly. So it's been easier but with other little rooms to explore.
Yeah. Well, how were you surprised? I don't think you were surprised to see your parents there, but were you surprised to see your nephew who had committed suicide? Because there are a lot of religious beliefs that say that when somebody does that, they do not go to heaven, and yet there he was.
You know, nothing about the NDE, only the shower experience surprised me. The NDE, the NDE or nothing in the shared death surprised me. It was beautiful to see Matthew there. It was lovely to see, family and all the rest of it. But in that moment, it was just nice seeing him so excited. He stood up because he was the only one that gave me expressions. Okay. The others were, I didn't see anything. So, and this is why I felt as part of not only telling my story about the shared death, particularly, is to emphasize in a way Matthew's part in it.
Yes.
Because he did different from all the others. All the others just stood there looking at Kate. Matthew was like, okay, she's coming. So I think it's important that people know that even if you lose somebody to suicide, they're there. They're as there as anybody else. The people I saw there, some of them had done things that nobody could ever remotely be proud of. Others had no belief in any religion. Others were absolutely anti-religion. And there were some who were religious. They're all there, and so in that moment, I was not surprised. And afterwards, it just brings me a tremendous amount of joy.
Oh my gosh, I love you sharing that so much. Did you share with Matthew's family?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Matthew, my sister. Yeah. His mom. Yes. Absolutely did. Yeah. She watches some of the videos that are out there too. Yeah.
I'm sure you brought them great comfort and joy and
I hope,
probably a little bit of relief.
I hope so. I do hope
Yeah,
so.
and I'm sure that you're doing the same thing because I don't believe there are any accidents, and anybody who's here watching this right now and hearing these messages, I'm sure they're messages they needed to hear today.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Annie, I have loved our conversation. So, do you have a way that people connect with you? Do you answer people if they reach out to you? How do you work with people? What do you do?
Absolutely. Well, I haven't. Okay. This is part of the whole thing with this. It has been very important to me. Well, not only those three main experiences, but everything after, and then remembering all the stuff before. It's been quite a journey, and I've also found that part of being given, especially the shared death experience, was I had to find a place to put it down. It wasn't only for me. I knew from the start it was not just for me. So
Sure.
doing this is my putting it down, is sharing it out. And since I've started doing that, I have found it equally important that I keep my feet in this world because I'm here for whatever reason. Okay. So I haven't delved too much deeply into doing any, I have started putting it all together in a format, in maybe a book, maybe just for the kids, I don't know. But I haven't done anything with it. I haven't explored anything. I've noticed some things happening that I'm more intuitive. I'm capable of different things now. But even those I haven't followed up with. It's only been just over a year. And I do want to get my feet firmly in this world again before I start doing that. So, that being said, absolutely, I love it when people reach out to me. The only thing I have is an email account, and I
Okay.
will always answer the emails. I love hearing other people's story. It feeds me. It feeds me.
Yes.
So anybody wants to reach out, absolutely, I'd love to talk to them. I'd
Okay.
love to hear their stories.
Well, I'll put that in the show notes for anybody who's interested.
Mm.
Annie, it has been so much fun talking to you. I love your experience and the depth of your experience. And you shared a lot of signs and synchronicities with us today, which we don't always get. And I think that's the blessing of having these experiences, is sharing all of those other parts
Mhm.
that I think are just as equally as important as the main experience.
I think they are, and it's important. People think that they maybe haven't had any of those, but until these three things happen, until the shared death, if somebody had asked me, have you had any spiritual experience, and there's many more, I would have said no, not really, because I never thought of it in that time, in that manner. So if anybody thinks they haven't had, and I believe we all have had, it's just whether we've recognized it or not. So people can sit down and just say, okay, just write down the things that seemed a little weird, a little odd, but you never spoke about. And you'll see they're there, they're around you.
I think that's great advice. I'm just so appreciative for you and for everything that you shared today. You are beautiful inside and out, and I
Thank you.
am so glad we got this time. This feeds my soul too.
Oh, thank you, Laurie. It's been amazing and easy and wonderful to talk to you. So
I
Thank you for
appreciate
giving me the opportunity.
Yes, and thank you so much to everybody for watching.
Thank you.
Next up, check out this playlist of other NDE interviews. Please like and subscribe. It really helps this channel to grow so I can bring you more content. Thank you for watching. I'm so glad you're here.